There we go. So we are up to chapter 11, but just before we begin chapter 11, which is a very long chapter, I just want to quickly bring you up to speed again. What happened last week? Chapter 10 was once again, of course, there was there was turmoil in Israel. They started worshiping other gods. Finally, God really has it up to here with them, and basically tells them, you know what? Here's some miseries, and they started being oppressed. They started crying out, and God told them, why don't you cry out to your own gods? You know, the ones that the ones that you're following. Go cry out to them. Finally, God can't take their screaming anymore. He's literally like a parent. He's, as much as he wants to discipline his children, he's still affected by their suffering. And it ends right where, the people turn back again. They throw away all their idols, and just as things are starting to seem a little bit rosy, Bnei Ammon, who are the neighbors, are now the aggressors, and they encamp and make an army. And right now, Sarei Gilad, all the people of Gilad, recognizing that there is going to be a war imminent, that they also amass their army, and however, what they are missing is they're missing a leader. And so they ask, and let's read the last pasuk 18. V'amru ha'am sarei Gilad isha re'ehu. The troops, the officers of Gilad, said one to another, Mi ha'ish, who's going to be the person asher yachel le'ilachem bivnei Ammon, who is the first to fight the Ammonites? Yihiyeh lerosh lechol yishvei Gilad, will be the chieftain over all the inhabitants of Gilad. So they need basically a warrior. They need somebody to come forward and who will rescue them. And this is where we find ourselves in chapter 11. Veiftach hagiladi, and Yiftach, the Giladite, haya gibor chayil. He was a very colorful, decorated warrior. Vehu ben isha zonah. However, he was the son of a harlot, of a prostitute. Vayoled Gilad et Yiftach. Gilad was the one who, remember we had it beforehand, Gilad, or let's look it backwards. Yiftach's father was Gilad. Okay. Vateled eshet Gilad lo banim. So in other words, the wife of Gilad, now this is the legal wife, so to speak, had also gave birth to Gilad's sons. So in other words, Yiftach had stepsons. All right. So his real wife also gave birth to sons. So he was not the only child of the loins of Gilad. Vayigdalu vnei ha'isha vaygarshu et Yiftach, and those children grew up, which seems to indicate that they were younger than Yiftach. They grew up and they kicked away Yiftach. Vayomru lo, they scoffed at him, and they mocked him and said to Yiftach, Lo tincha beveit avinu, you will not inherit. You will not share in the inheritance of our father's property. Kiven isha acher tata, for you are the son of another woman. Okay, at least they had the decency of calling him another woman, an outside woman, however, not a harlot.
So Yosi,
yes, Michael.
We would distinguish this relationship from the relationship of Joshua, because that was the harlot that became his actual wife.
Right. Here, I think the idea here with the difference was that obviously he had relations with a harlot in her job, in her day job, so to say, or night job application. Not afterwards when she decided, she quit that job and that profession and went clean and married Joshua. That's a different story. She's no longer. Maybe her past is a little sketchy, but in this case, she was acting in her role, and she had how do you call it? She had a son. There are those, by the way, Michael, you're not wrong. There are those that say it's not. They don't have any beef with so much about the fact that she was a harlot, because he married her. So there are differences of opinions, but and that is perhaps why they call her Isha Cheret. They no longer call her how do you call it, a harlot here, or a prostitute. But most I guess it's 50-50. Sometimes it's unclear, and that's not really the point of what the story is telling is teaching us. It's the idea is here that he's definitely of a lesser quality lineage, or at least this is the way that we're seeing it, or he's seen by his brethren, by his brothers, his stepbrothers, and they kicked him out. And they said, you're bringing shame onto the family. You will not inherit part of that which our father owned, and they kicked him out. Just the fact also that he has no claim to any of inheritance also leads to the point that she must have been in the act of being still a prostitute when Gilad had relations with her. Otherwise, if it was a wife, why shouldn't he have a claim, right? So what does Yiftach do? Vayvrach Yiftach mipnei Echav. So Yiftach flees. He leaves from all this bantering and all this belittling from his brethren. Vayeshev be'eretz tov, and he went and he settled in Eretz Tov. Vayit laktu el Yiftach anashim rikim, and these low characters or seemingly bums were attracted or gathered around Yiftach rikim. They were empty. They had no worth, so to speak, or they were not contributors. Vayetzu imo, and they used to raid. They were almost kind of like pirates of some sort.
Bandits.
So, did somebody want to say something?
I said bandits.
Yeah, bandits. Exactly. They were bandits or they were crooks or they used to not exactly abide by the law. They were empty people in terms of they did not better the community. They actually were a nuisance.
Yosi, so we don't read anything into the fact that the name of the place where he was dwelling was Tov, but it doesn't mean good. It means Tov, but you almost have to put a nikuda, a dot into the bet. It's
Tov.
almost Tov.
No, it's Tov. Eretz Tov, Be'eretz Tov. It could be in the good country, or a country where or the land that also produced well. In other words, I think here, if you want to look at it from a textual way, the text is kind of belittling Yiftach himself. That he lived in a good land. It's not like he lived under harsh conditions and there was no choice. You can look at it where he lived in either the name of the place was named Tov, and if it's named Tov, means usually when we name it, it's good. It's not a bad land. It's not the empty lands. It's not the desert. It's a good land. And he should have had other opportunities of making money or surviving and living, and yet he decided to turn towards empty things, towards things that were brought no value, no added value to community and to the world. So he was another, if you want to say, it's another kind of a little shot, okay, that he was so affected, he was not living a good life. He was not living a proper life. Okay, so what happens? Vayhi miyamim, vaylachamu vnei Ammon in Israel. Sometime later, the Ammonites went to war against Israel. Okay, so this is the first 3 psukim. Yiftach HaGiladi is kind of in the past. This is not right now what's happening. This was after the end of chapter 10, where the people of Gilad are looking for a leader. It's kind of like a snippet in the past. Now there's a guy named Yiftach who was a son of a harlot, and he lived somewhere else, and he was not exactly how do you call it? He was a decorated warrior. He was certainly was not scared to fight, etc. But he lived somewhere else. And now we're back to present time. What happened after he moved out? Now we're in present time. Finally, those armies that were amassing in the mountains and the Bnei Gilad are right now in war. Okay? And it was when the Ammonites attacked Israel Va'elchu ziknei Gilad, the elders of Gilad went, lakachat et Yiftach me'eretz Tov, to bring back, to ask Yiftach to come back from the Tov country. Vayamru leYiftach, they reached Yiftach and they besieged him. They said to him, Lecha, come, va'ita lanu lekatzin, you will be for us a chief, v'nilachama bivnei Ammon, so that we can fight and defeat the Ammonites. So in other words, they went out to try to woo him back home so that he can be their warrior leader. Vayomer Yiftach leziknei Gilad. So Yiftach retorts and tells these elders of Gilad, Halo atem snei temotim, did you not hate me? Vadgarshuni mi beit avi. You were the ones who rejected me and you sent me, you threw me out of my father's house. Madua batem elai ata. Why are you now coming to me? Kasher tzar lachem. Now that when you're in trouble, by the way, does it sound like anything? What does it sound like?
It sounds
Yes, sir.
like the children of Israel that they plead to God when they're in distress.
Almost sounds like
Yeah.
what we had in chapter 10 when God is telling him,
Yeah,
oh, you rejected me, you went and you did what you wanted to do. Now that you're in pain and suddenly you realize that you're not, now you need me, So this is what he says. And so they retorted, the elders of Gilad retorted, and they say as follows: Lachen, that is why, Ata shavnu elecha. Yes, we're being honest with you, and that is the reason why we have come, because we need you. V'halachti imanu, we need you to come with us. V'nilchamda bivnei Ammon, so that you can lead us in battle against the Ammonites. But v'hita lanu lerosh, after that, you will become an important person. L'chol yoshvei Gilad, not only the army, you will be a commander over all the inhabitants of Gilad. So they're telling me, yes, yes, we're not lying to you. We're not coming to you because suddenly we realized that we've wronged you and we love you and we, your place is there. We actually need you. But if you do come and if you do return, we promise you that you'll become someone important. You'll take your place, almost that which you should have had in the community. If you read between the lines, the elders of Gilad, why is he yelling at them, telling, didn't you send me? It seems like these brothers of his, or stepbrothers, were obviously people who became very important people. So Gilad, his father, was not just some regular inhabitant. He was an important person in Gilad. Okay, so here he is.
Yes, see.
Esther. Yes, Esther, and afterwards Farla. Yes.
Okay, it seems as though he was a man who was, he had a lot of qualities that were good, and they realized that, and the boys, his younger brothers, were just wanting not to share anything with him until they realized that he could give them something, and that was leadership.
Could be, but it obviously they need something. Otherwise, if they wouldn't, who says that they would ever come and
Well,
reach out
that's
to him?
right.
They needed something. They needed protection. They didn't want to die. They wanted to survive the war, etc. They went. They're gonna double down. Obviously, they. What's the most important thing is to survive. After that, the terms will negotiate. So it's right now we need you to come in and we'll give you that which you should have deserved from the. We realize, yes, they're not apologizing though. Farla, you had a question.
Well, I'm just wondering what was so special about Jephthah? Where do we see that he had leadership qualities?
I think he was a bullavan. He was somebody who was very strong, somebody who was a bull, as you can tell with what he was doing as his survival, what he was doing to earn a living. He was obviously somebody who was a crafty warrior, somebody who was. In those days, it was not so much about your equipment, how technological. It was literally physical. War was a physical thing, and he had the attributes of a warrior. So both, I guess, in terms of a mind, he was able to think like a warrior, He strategized, as you will shortly see, but also he was a physically capable a man. So they needed some really strong person, just like we see with David and Goliath. There's one big dude who's going to wipe out everybody. It was a different way of war than what we know right now of necessarily. There were different conventions of war. Some wars were, a lot of people going down on the city or ransacking or attacking. Sometimes it was an agreed war, and we see it in I always like to move it to reflect kind of like on movies. If you see Troy, when instead of people killing each other, they say, hey, you know what? My leader against your leader. Whoever wins, that's what it is. So that way, at least one person dies rather than everybody else. And we then we'll have also the winner will have a lot of servants. Think about it, because rather than everybody killing, you'll have a much bigger army later on, because you'll just absorb the losers into your midst. So there were a lot of ways of war. Some of it was actually very, very respectable in a sense. It wasn't done with necessarily who from afar, etc. It was hand-to-hand combat. It was face-to-face, and you were able to technically make certain terms. It was different than today in terms of having conventions of war, which we have, because we know that there's so many dangerous ways of doing it. But it was literally, a lot of it was about power, how strong you were and how smart really you were on the field that day. So almost kind of like a wrestling match that day you went into a match, and how do you defeat the person on the other side? On the red, you're in the blue corner, this is the red corner. What do you need to do to beat the red corner? Okay. Does that make sense?
Could I just read to you what it says about Jephthah?
Sure.
It says, he appears in the book of Judges as a judge who presided over Israel for a period of 6 years. According to Judges, he lived in Gilead. His father's name is also given as Gilead, and his mother described as a prostitute. This may indicate that his father might have been any of the men in that area. Jephthah led the Israelites in battle against Ammon, and in exchange for defeating, anyway, that we haven't come to yet.
Don't give everybody the ending. Don't. I have everybody in suspense. Don't ruin it. Farla.
No, sorry, I'm stopping.
Yes, you are absolutely right. He did rule. That's when he received that. That's what the pasuk that we're up to right now, that they're promising him that if you do lead us, then you will become vahita lanu lerosh lechodesh veGilad. You will become our commander, or the head of all inhabitants of Gilad. And you're right, and you're indeed right. He becomes a shofet for 6 years. But we'll get to that afterwards. Okay. All right. So Vayomer Yiftach Ziknei Gilad, and he retorts back and he says, Im meshivim atem oti lilachem bivnei Ammon. If you are bringing me back, you're asking me to return in order to fight the Ammonites, v'natan Adonai otam lefanai, and God will deliver them before me. Anochi ehiyeh lachem lerosh. I will be your commander.
Not right now.
I accept. I will be your head. Okay, I will be your leader. He accepts those terms. Vayamru ziknei Gilad el Yiftach. The elders of Gilad answered Jephthah, saying, Adonai yeshoma benotenu. God right now is going to be our witness. He will listen to the pact that we are making. Im lochid varecha chenaseh. For we will do exactly as you have just uttered. So vayelech Yiftach im ziknei Gilad. And so Yiftach goes with the elders of Gilad. Vayasimu ha'am oto alehem lerosh u'katzin, and they anointed him. They placed him as the head and as the commander, as the chief. Vaydaber Yiftach et kol dervarav lifnei Rabba Mitzpah, and Yiftach went up and repeated all these terms before the Lord in Mitzpah. Mitzpah was also one of these places that was considered to be holy. So we have we have Shiloh, we have Mitzpah, we have a bunch of different places throughout the land. Remember, Yerushalayim, yet the temple is not yet built; it hasn't yet settled in one particular place. Shiloh was also another, how do you call it, a spiritual Mecca in Israel for that at that time. So basically, they seal the deal. That's really what the last couple of psukim, they come up with terms, and both sides agree to the terms. Now, next section, as you can see, Peter, we have a little pay. Do you see it? You see it, the little pay? Beautiful. So that's the next item on the agenda. Verse 12. Vaishlach Yiftach malachim el melech bnei Ammon lemor. And so Yiftach goes to work. What's the first thing he does? He sends messengers to the king of Ammon, and he tells the message, Ma livalach, what do you and I have? What do you have against me? Why are we fighting about? Kivata alayla lachem be'artzi, for you have come to battle, to engage me in battle, into my land. Okay? So Yiftach is being diplomatic. He wants to know what's the grievance of Ammon. Vayomer melech bnei Ammon and malachei Yiftach. And so the king of Ammon returns the following message to, and he answers the messengers of Yiftach. Why am I battling you? Ki lakach Yisrael et artzi me'alato mitzrayim. For Israel has taken my land when they came out of Egypt. And what was that land? Me'arnon ve'ad hayabok ve'ad hayarden. And he gives them the whole area that is under dispute, from the Arnon until the Yabok and until the Yarden. Ve'ata. So now, hashiva eten b'shalom. Return them to me in peace, and no fighting. Okay.
Always about land. Huh?
Exactly.
Mhm.
So vayosef od Yiftach vaishlach malachim el melech ben Ammon. So Yiftach once again sends messengers to the king of Ammon, and he sent them with the following message. Vayomerlo. He said to him. So now the messengers are speaking in singular, a direct message from Yiftach. Ko amar Yiftach. This is exactly, we are not paraphrasing, this is exactly what Yiftach has said. Lo lakach Yisrael et Eretz Moav. Israel has not taken the land of Moav, vet Eretz bnei Ammon. And we have not seized any land of Moav or the land of the Ammonites. Why? When the Israelites left Egypt, Vayelech Israel bamidbar ad Yam Suf. Israel traveled through the wilderness to the Sea of Reeds, Vayavo Kadesha, and we reached the place named Kadesh. What happens in Kadesh? Vaishlach Israel malachim el melech Edom lemor. The Israelites sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, they asked for permission. Ebrana ve'artzecha, allow us to cross in your country in order for us to reach our destination. Before we trespass, we're asking for permission to go through your land. So what happened? Velo shama melech Edom. And Melech Edom did not listen. So what happens? V'gam el melech Moav shalach velo ava. And also Moses sent that same message to Moav to allow us to go through the land. And they also did not give permission. So what happened? Israel had no choice, and they remained in Kadesh. Vayeshev Israel beKadesh. Vayelech bamidbar. So they had no choice, so they traveled through the wilderness. Vayasov et Eretz Edom. The Israelites had to encircle and go around. They had to create a circle around or detour around the land of Edom and around Eretz Moav. And what did they do? Vayavo mimizrach shemesh leEretz Moav. They kept to the east of the land of Moav. Vayachanu be'ever Arnon, until they encamped on the other side of the Arnon River. Velo va'u b'gvul Moav. They never ever crossed into Moav proper. We never entered the territory of Moav. Ki Arnon gvul Moav, because Arnon was the end, was the defining mark. We never entered into that. So we encircled it. Vaishlach Yisrael malachim el Sichon melech HaAmorim melech Heshbon. Then Israel sent messengers to Sichon, the king of the Amorites. Vayomer lo Israel, na'abrana ve'artzecha ad mekomi. Please allow us to cross through your country so that we can reach finally our homeland. What happened? Velo ha'emin Sichon et Israel avor bigvula. But Sichon would not trust Israel to pass through their territory. But they didn't just say no. Vayesof Sichon et kol amo. So Sichon gathers its warriors, gathers in its army. Vayachanu beyatza and vaylachem im Israel. They gathered and they encamped in Yatza, and then they finally went into battle against the Israelites. What happened there? Vaiten Adonai Elohei Israel Sichon v'et kol amo. At that point, guess who defeated Sichon? God gave Sichon into the hands of the Israelites. Vayakum vayirach Israel et kol eretz ha'amori yoshev haaretz ha'ih, and they defeated Sichon melech Emor, and the Israelites now inherited. That was the cost. You battled, you lost, we conquered. That was the loss of the Amorites. Vayishu et kol gvul ha'amori, and they inherited all of the Amorites' area. Me'arnon ve'ad ha'yabok u'mina midbar ve'ad ha'yarden. The entire territory that you think, buddy, it ain't yours because your ancestors decided to battle, going to battle against the Israelites, and you lost. And so it's no longer your land. Ve'ata, and now, Adonai Elohei Yisrael horishet ha'amori mipnei amo Yisrael. For now, the God of Israel has disposed of the Amorites and gave them their land. Ve'ata tirashenu. And do you think that you will come and possess it? In other words, he's asking a question. God, are you gonna battle against that which God wishes? God disposed the Amorites so that the Israelites can receive the land. So now you are gonna dispose and of us and take the land and go against the wishes of God? Like what are you thinking of? Basically, he's telling him. Halo et asher yorishcha kemo shelohecha oto tirash. Do you not hold what Chemosh, your God, gives you to possess? Chemosh was the religion that they followed. Okay. Whatever you lost your battle, that was what your God gave you then, and this is what our God gave us. So be happy with what you have had. You made a wrong decision. You thought that you had the right powers behind you. Very clear you didn't, but this is what your God wanted you to have. This is what our God wanted us to have. Okay, so we all have our pieces of land in terms of that. Ve'ata, and now, hatov tov ata. Besides, are you any better? Mi Balak ben Tzipor melech Moab. Do you think you're any better? So now Yiftach is going through all the history of all the different historical battles that took place while the Israelites were in the desert trying to get into the land of Israel. And now he's comparing him, he's telling him, think right now, do you think you're any stronger, any better than Balak ben Tzipor, the king of Moab, who wanted to also destroy us, and he also wanted to start a quarrel with Israel, to go to war with them? Well, what happened? Beshevet Yisrael becheshbon vivnotea uvaror vivnotea uvchol harim asher al yedei Arnon 300 shana. We have now settled here in all these lands 300 years. So this is roughly 300 years since they came in.
Joshua, yeah.
Why, if this was really your cause, why have you never even dared try to recoup or recover all these lands in 300 years? It's by your actions you also simply, right? You're admitting that it's no longer your land. You waited 300 years to, how do you call it, to remedy this, if this is really your issue. Vanochi lo chatati lach. Sorry.
That's you.
Yiftach, thank you. Yiftach says, I have not done anything wrong against you. Vata, however, you Ata oseti ra'ali lachem bi. You are right now wronging me by engaging me in battle. But Yishpot Adonai Hashofet Hayom, God will be the ultimate judge who will judge today. Bein Bnei Israel uven Bnei Ammon. God will decide between the Israelites or the Ammonites. V'lo shama melech Ammon el divrei Yiftach asher shalach elav. However, the king of Ammon does not heed the warnings of Yiftach, and they're ready for battle. So at least there was some kind of diplomatic attempts. Nope. Bnei Ammon wants, the king of Ammon wants none of this. He wants what he believes is his land back.
Yosi, this is land that's west of the Jordan, is it not?
Yes. Vatehi al Yiftach ruach Adonai, and the spirit of the Lord came upon Yiftach. Vayavor et Hagilad vet Menashe, and so he marched through the Gilad and through the land of Menashe. Vayavor et Mitzpe Gilad, passing the Mitzpe is almost like a
Porch.
In between like two mountains. Not it's a little it's a pass, the pass, okay, the pass of Mitzpe Gilad. Mitzpe Gilad avar bnei Ammon, and from the Mitzpe, from this pass, which are the between two mountains, okay, it's not quite a valley, but he's hidden in between these two valleys in this pass, and from there he crossed over into the Ammonites. And as he does so, he does something very, very, very important. Vaidar Yiftach neder l'Adonai. There, Yiftach makes the following vow to God. Vayomar, and Yiftach says, Im naton titen et bnei Ammon be'adi, if, and this is Yiftach speaking to God, if, God, if you give the people of deliver the Ammonites into my hand, V'haya hayotze asher etzeh midalte veiti likrati, and then whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me, v'shuvi v'shalom b'nei Ammon, once I return from this battle with Bnei Ammon, v'haya l'Adonai, they shall be offered to God, v'halitihu olah, and I will offer them as a burnt offering. Does everybody get it? It's quite powerful a promise, a vow. All right. So, in other words, he recognizes that war is imminent. He's just about to attack the Ammonites, and he makes a pact with God. When I return, if I return home, if I win and return home safely, the first one whatever greets me from my house, doesn't say person, whatever greets me from my house, that becomes like a burnt offering to God. Let's continue on. As you notice again, there's a pay. That's the end of this idea. New topic. Vayavor Yiftach el bnei Ammon lilachem bam vayitnem barana biyado. It's very not much detail. Very simply, Yiftach crosses over to the Ammonites, attacks them, defeats, and God delivers them into his hands. And where does he deliver them? From Vayakeme Aror vad bocha minit esrim ir. He utterly routed them from Aroer as far as Minith, some 20 towns, Ave'ad, Avel Kramim, all the way to Avel Kramim. Makak Dola Mehod, he hit the Ammonites with an incredible hit. In other words, a very, very big loss on the side of the Ammonites. Vaikanu bnei Ammon mipnei bnei Israel. The Ammonites submitted. They actually waved the white flag and they gave up, and the Israelites defeated them. The end again of an idea. Now we're moving into the next subject. So finally, his wish came true. God kept his end, and now he's returning home. Don't forget, remember what his vow was?
The burnt offering, yeah.
So keep that in mind.
Korban, yeah.
Vayavo Yiftach HaMitzpah, and when Yiftach finally arrived at his home in Mitzpah, Vehine vito yotzet likrato, lo and behold, who comes towards him? His daughter comes out of his house to greet him. Betupim uvimcholot, with timbrels and dance and music. Verak hi yachida, she was an only child. Ein lo mimena ben ovat. He had no other son or daughter. So it's his single daughter who comes out of the house. Vayichir oto ota, when he sees her, vaikrat begadav, he rips his clothing. Vayomer ahabiti hachre hichratini. You have brought me low. You have from such a high of battle, the victory, you have right now crushed me. Ve'at be'ochrai, for I have uttered a vow. Ve'anochi patziti fi el Adonai, I have opened my mouth and vowed to God. Ve'lo uchal ashuv, I cannot return that vow. In other words, he says right now, what should be the scene is they're so happy to, right? She's so happy to see her father coming in. She's in that, and he's just the exact opposite after what he should be victorious. If you remember a couple of weeks ago, we had the idea of what it meant when we make a vow. A vow is not just a promise. There are very few people today that actually, when they make a promise, they keep their promise. I'm not talking about, yeah, but I wasn't serious. There's no going back. It's a very, to make a promise is, you have to do it. It's an incredible thing. However, we'll see what happens here, because what does this vow entail, by the way?
A korban.
A korban, which entails what?
It's sacrificing life, but if you go back to the story of Abraham and Yitzhak, it's very clear that we don't do that.
So let's find out how he goes around and how we rectify this, because certainly you can't make a vow that you will basically sometimes maybe that will affect somebody else, especially by killing them. So how can you? So, how do you do that?
See, we distinguish this vow from the vow of Hannah with respect to Shmuel.
100%. That was called a Nazir. Not only that, the Shmuel, by the way, was Shmuel tells her that this is what she will need to do in order for the child to remain alive. That was out of necessity. Hannah accepts the terms. Understand? That was one of, it's very different. Here, he makes a vow. His daughter has nothing to do with what he said. Has nothing. She didn't say, suggest it, or she had no idea. I mean, I'm sure if she had known, she would have stayed indoors. You know what I mean? So it's so here it's a little bit of different. Here, somebody's putting someone's life in grave danger, and he says, I can't go back on it. I cannot retract it or take it back. Vatomer elav. So she says, Avi, patzita at picha el Adonai, if you have uttered a vow, aseli kasher etzam et picha, do unto me as what came out of your mouth. Acharei asher asa lecha Adonai nekamot moevecha mibnei Ammon. After God kept his end of the bargain, he saved you. He not only saved you, but he enabled you to defeat Bnei Ammon. You have no choice but to keep that which you uttered out of your mouth. Vatomer el avia yaseh li hadavar hazeh. She further said to her father, let this be done for me. Harpeh mimeni shenaim chodashim. Let me be for 2 months. Velcha v'yaradeti al heharim. And I will go with my companions in lament. I will go down upon the hills, because Mitzpeh was high on the mountains. Mitzpeh, by the way, by the definition, Mitzpeh means a sight. In other words, when you see something overlooking, that's a Mitzpeh. So his house was strategically on top of a mountain. She says, let me for 2 months go down and into the hills, down below with my friends, and there we will lament. Vefke al betulai anochi v'ra'otai, and we will bewail my maidenhood, myself, and my friends, those closest to me. So what ends up happening? Can anybody understand what happens between verse 36 and 37?
Well, she's encouraging her father to keep the vow, and that she's effectively going into a preparatory period to follow through.
Okay, okay. So but let's continue on, and maybe you'll be a little bit clearer, okay? Let's continue 38. Vayomer, so Yiftach tells her, Lechi, go ahead, go for 2 months. Vaishlach ota shnei chodashim, she went out for 2 months. Vatelach hi her and all her friends. Vatefk al betuleha al heharim, there she bewailed, she cried, she lamented over her betuleha, that she was still a virgin upon she was never taken by a man on the mountains. Vayhi miket shnaim chodashim, after 2 months' time, Batashav el aviha, and she returned to her father. Vayasla et nidro asher nadar, vehi lo yada ish vati chok beIsrael. And he did to her as he had vowed. She had never known a man, and as it was custom in Israel, in the sense of not sleeping with someone out of wedlock. So what happens? Miyamim yamima, year after year, and if you know, we have this exact same verbiage, miyamim yamima, of keeping Pesach, miyamim yamima, year after year. Telachna bnot Yisrael letanot levat Yiftach Giladi. Every year, year after year, the maidens of Israel go up in order to cry and to chant and to memorialize the daughter of Yiftach Giladi, Arbat Yamim Bashana, 4 days of the year. So
Is there a song about this?
I'm not sure.
Somehow I remember.
I'm not sure.
Yosi, could you explain to us how we go all the way back to the Akedah, and God's really clear there that we don't do human sacrifices? And that doesn't, so explain to me how this is not contrary to that.
So it's an incredibly sad story. Now look at Farla is like it's hard, it's unbelievable. The how do you call it? Just we can't and we shouldn't even imagine, what it is. But I want to give a little bit of
or my misunderstanding the end.
Yeah. So there are actually 2 different opinions, and part of that one opinion, Michael, will answer your question. There were opinions as to what exactly transpired and why suddenly, she's asking for 2 months to go out, and what exactly occurred here. Okay, certainly it would be almost unthinkable if Yiftach was allowed to commit what we're actually thinking we are reading, right? I can't put any, no matter what he would say, how can he put somebody else's life? He would have to live with a vow that he could not, right? If I right now make a vow that I make a vow that I will use somebody's money to buy myself a huge house, as an example, right? I have to come over to them and say, excuse me, I made a vow, so you please give me your money because I made this vow and now you owe me the money, right? And you make a vow, I make a vow that I don't owe him any money forever. And what kind of, it actually belittles this whole idea of making vows. So what some Mefarshim, what some commentaries explain is what she did when she says, let me go with 2 months with my friends, was as part of Olah, being burned, so to speak, was that she actually lived a life of solitude. She was excommunicated, kind of thing, not because anything she did, but she had to live a life totally recluse from anybody, as though she was, because there's this concept of if you are away from community, if you live alone, it is as though you're dead. So she had not only that, the important thing is we said here, Vehi lo yad'a ish, in verse 39, she did not know man. She had no offspring, which means Yiftach also, his lineage, that's it, finished, was cut. So she lived kind of like, if you want to say, almost kind of like a monk in terms of a very, very solitary life, but she wanted 2 months to be at least with her friends. So for 2 months before she committed to living alone, all alone and away from everybody, she was never able to visit anybody. This is what was done, not in terms of actually bringing her as a burnt offering.
So that's how, Yossi, that's how we should then interpret, is that Talmudically how it's interpreted? The original offer didn't mean a burnt offering, but something different or less?
So it's kind of where the burnt, I think it's hard to explain whether he meant in terms of an animal, and he was not careful to say whatever, regardless of what animal comes out of my stable, I will offer it. In other words, even if it's my prized, animal that I would never think of. And he ended up saying whatever walks through the gates of my house, which ended up being his daughter. He was not careful with his words. But again, certainly you can't put somebody to death because of somebody's vow. Do you understand?
Well, I mean, well, that's what we learned from the Akedah.
Right. But the Akedah was God. God instructed Abraham. Abraham didn't say, you know what I promise right now to go and kill my son. No.
But we also learned from the Akedah that we don't do human offerings.
Right. So Iftach certainly did not mean, it would be ludicrous to think that he would, put anybody's life in danger in that way. That vow, some of the commentators say, that is a little bit of a throwback to those psukim saying that he was with people who were empty. What do I mean by empty? They said stupid things. They did stupid things. They did things that were worthless and had no substance to them. And a lot of people that build castles on nothing, like on what's the build towers on all these things. It's all very puffy and nothing comes to fruition. They're not building or offering anything good. But it was beyond that. It's not that he didn't do anything. It was rake. It was empty. There was nothing in there, and that is still sometimes. It still had an effect on what came out of his mouth. He was brainless in terms of not being careful how he used his mouth. He might have been a great strategist, was a very great warrior, but still the people that he hung around with and the way that he lived his life beforehand certainly affected how he was thinking or what he uttered. And you can see it. But it's impossible, or it'd be very difficult to accept that his daughter would have to be literally burnt or brought as a burnt offering. Even more so, Michael, like you say, what ended up happening with Akedah? Who ended up stopping Abraham?
The angel.
An angel. Basically God's
messenger.
Right?
Yeah.
God sends a messenger, tell him, no, we don't accept this. It was just to see how far you'd go. So certainly God would have no interest in a burnt offering of we don't even know her name. We don't even know who she is. We're not going to assume she's a bad person. There's no reason for us to. But it's not like this is somebody. It was a regular human being. God isn't asking for, you know what I mean, like to show his trust, etc. And so the way that Yiftach is punished is that through his daughter there is no regeneration. And of course she accepts that which her father, because she really recognizes the good that God bestowed upon him in terms of returning him safely and giving the Ammonites in defeat, but still she had to ultimately pay the price in the sense of living a solitude life. It's very sad. And the last pasuk, Miyamim Yamima, Again, there are those that say, however, for 4 days a year, she was allowed to have visitors, not family, but so strangers from throughout the land visited her for 4 years.
4 days a year.
For 4 days, for 4 days a year. That's what, and in order to cry with her, in order to lament with her in terms of what she's going through. But besides that, she was all alone. And that's basically like being, so to speak, dead, in the sense of when you're when you have no communications with anybody, you're all alone. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Castaway.
Yeah.
That you've seen. You
Yeah.
know, when he's out on that island and the only thing he has is Wilson, which was a ball, and he literally goes crazy, right? Like, I mean, it's like a sentence, right? Like there's nobody that he can share anything with, nothing that nobody can talk with, nothing that he can experience anything with. It's we should never, you know, have this God forbid. And she was really reduced to that. So that was a punishment enough. You can almost make the argument that maybe death is almost, you know, easier in the sense of, you know, her. But imagine you have to live a young, you know, it's horrific. But that is that's the story. So
He was very creative in Castaway. He took an inanimate object and tried to make it animate.
Right.
But you know,
Mr. Wilson, that was the volleyball, you know. Absolutely. But the whole idea of solitary life, and that is, it's not a humanistic thing. This is not what we were created for. In Judaism, we live in a community, and that is part of what the story is about, in the sense of he ended up coming back, and as Farl, as you said, he was the leader for 6 years, as a shofet for 6 years. But it's a very, very difficult thing. Can you imagine what you have to, as well as a father, have to live with for the rest of your life? It's quite astonishing. But the idea is, again, we learned community, the importance of contributing, the idea of acceptance in the sense of what his brothers were doing to him that forced him to leave, and ultimately we also learn about how important it is to watch what we say. That's something that actually was in last week's Torah portion of Tazria and Metzora, which was how do we guard our tongue, because Tzara'at, the leprosy, was not what we know here today as leprosy. It was more of a spiritual ailment where it came by when somebody spoke ill of somebody else. Not only just negative, but it's even if it's a truth, because if it was not true, it would be a lie. So a lie, you're not allowed. Tzaraat is even something that is kind of impact somebody, even if it might be true, you're still not allowed to say it. Gossiping is not just things that are untrue. It could be totally true, but if you know you're doing it and you're hurting somebody by saying it, that is gossiping. It's not only saying, because it's not lying, but you're there to talk about somebody to affect them, and that is something that is if society like that can't produce any positivity when people talk bad about other people. So it's a very, very, very serious flaw that we have, but also it's a value where, you know, like what's the saying? If you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. Just keep your mouth shut. That's fine. You know what I mean? Keep it to yourself. You know, if you have nothing constructive to say, keep your mouth shut. And here as well, there was no need for him to make any vow of that nature, something that is out of his control, so to speak. Usually a vow is made something that is what you can control. In other words, I promise I'll give such and such. I will give of myself, you know, Michael, like you mentioned in terms of Chana, which we will get to in a couple of chapters, in 2 chapters. We will get to that. But I wanted to end it off with as follows. Where is this? This is a haftarah in a Torah portion, right? Cindy, and I know Cindy got it last week because she had it in. Where is this haftarah? Because this is a haftarah. For what parasha?
Chukat. Chukat Balak.
Cuts.
Parshat Chukat. Yeah.
Cuts.
And sometimes if Chukat is read together with Balak, but
But,
Chukat, yeah. And again, the idea of Chukat again is they actually give you there the story of what Yiftach here was talking about that whole, as the Israelites were traveling, what happens is that they go to this king and they ask him to go through it and not go through it, and they don't go through it, and finally Sichon Melech Hamori, how do you call it? Takes his army and goes into battle with the Israelites. So we have all that, and as well, the interesting thing about Chukat is it begins with the rules. If someone is impure, what does one have to do in order to get pure, to purify himself? And this is a little bit indicative of the whole story of he was kind of seen as an impure person, and being, son of a harlot, of a prostitute. He was seen as a degenerate of some sort, somebody who brought shame upon the family, and yet he rose to be a shofet for 6 years over all his brethren as well. So it shows also the idea that from anybody can rise from no matter what level he or she can find themselves at. Never despair. There's always a way of purifying, so to speak, yourself, and getting out of whatever yuck you think you're at, whether it's spiritually, whether it's physically, whether it's mentally, whether it's financially, whatever it might be. There's always a remedy for you to get out of that hole, and God willing, not only to get out of that hole, but also get to an incredibly high level from that. So everybody.
So Yosi, it could almost, I don't know, maybe it's a poor comparison, but not unlike Reish Lakish.
Yes. So yes, there is that.
Because we've been studying that with Rabbah, Reish Lakish with Rabbah this winter. Yeah.
So it's interesting that you say that, because the rabbis, the commentaries that and I don't remember the whole stories, but also similar idea that Reish Lakish says if he can jump off a horse or something. What was it?
Well, if you could go across the river and but it was it involved the river.
Right, and then jump and the river.
And then get on the horse, yeah.
And then jumping on the horse backwards and all. And in any event, there was also a vow that was made. And the rabbis actually compare these two incidences, and that's how they extrapolate the details between them in terms of what really occurred.
Yeah, they both come from rather shady backgrounds before their rise to a respectability.
Rabbi Reish Lakish literally means the head of the bandits.
Bandits, yeah.
So he was the head. He was which is very similar to what happens here. This, Yiftach was where he moves to Eretz Tov, and he becomes who sticks with him. These empty men who are attracted to him, in terms of they create a friendship and a bond, and they're going around, pillaging or looting, however you want to look at it, but basically empty things that are not bringing any worth to society. If anything, it brings negativity and lowers the community. But regardless, thank you, Michael, for bringing that. This is the comparison of those two stories, and I urge you to see it. If God willing, if I remember, I'll share with you the details. I didn't even think of doing that next week of what with Reish Lakish. Yes.
Like Yiftach's daughter is very brave. I'm just wondering why they never mentioned her name.
Very good question. Very good question. I don't know. There's a lot of instances where we don't mention the players or people's names. I don't know. It's also a very good question. I don't know. Anybody want to offer an answer? Justin?
Well, how often do they mention women's names?
No, we have Dvorah. We have the one who kills. How do you call it? Who in the story of Dvorah as well. We certainly have women's names.
We have the woman who negotiated her property rights.
Yeah.
Right, but that story is about the woman. Like in this story, it all relates to Jephthah.
I think maybe you're onto something, Cindy. I like that. I like that explanation, that it's not really about her in the sense of she's affected by it, but it's all what he had, all the trouble that he has caused. Maybe that's the way. I also think maybe it's just an anonymity. You know what I mean? In terms of it was unimportant for us to know, so to speak, her name. Or maybe, but you can look at it as well. Maybe we should have, how brave she was. Maybe we should have recognized her name. I don't know. It's
If you look at
question,
the
Henry.
last verse 40 or 39:40, it
Yeah.
became a custom in Israel for the maidens of Israel to go every year for 4 days in the year and chant dirges for the daughter of Yiftach. You would
Yeah.
think they would chant her name.
Yeah.
Okay.
Possibly just out of maybe as of ritual, just because of what happened, in the sense that she kind of, she was the first one out. It was almost kind of, her name was almost as part of that punishment, or as part of that vow, which was to bring her as a burnt offering, which basically her, all her offspring, so to speak, her lineage ends. Part of that maybe is her name as well. I don't know. So maybe that's part of that vow, in the sense that her whole identity, so to speak, is almost became inked out, if you want to say it. It kind of like blurred out, just as what Yiftach wanted to do was, bring her up as an offering, and she would be no longer at that moment. That's kind of also part of that. Nobody knows her, or maybe as a punishment, the fact that she went along with it, and she said, you know what, sure, do for me. She should have, I don't know about you, but if this happens to me, would you not raise your arms up and say, what? Right? What's going on? What's going on?
You're focusing on the daughter. It doesn't give the name of the mother either.
Yeah.
And according to my commentary, the mother was an heiress.
Interesting. Yeah. So it's usually there's not that much. And I think, Cindy, you're definitely right. When there's very few times where a woman's name is given. It usually is given when that person will affect future generations. In other words, if the story would have continued as to what happened with the rest of it, then most likely there would have been names given. So you'll look at it, stuff like Shifra and Pu'ah.
Shifra, that's it, yeah.
In Shmot. Why? Because they were the, Moshe.
Yeah.
And then it continues, and so we want to know the lineage of where it happens. This is just a story of a one-timer, and it's, I don't want to say it's almost non-pertinent, in the sense of we don't need to know who is what and what to whom later on. It's details that is not that important in the grand scheme, not in terms of psychological or sociological. Why shouldn't she get the recognition? That's a different story. But really, it's not important information, because she will not have any effect on anything going forward. So it's just, she was the daughter of Yitro. That's it. So we can't look at it from our eyes, like in terms of, oh, if you want to say it, then give her a name, don't just say, or what would, what do we say? Say her name, like, don't just say her. That's maybe today's, there was just, it's not important information. There's other things also where, the mother of Abraham, nobody ever gives, like Terach, we know, because it used to be lineage, but nobody knows what the mother of, and other Lot's wife, right? What is Lot's wife? She's referred to as
Lot's wife.
That's wife.
I
Lots
thought it was interesting that when we read where this becomes the Haftorah, what happens to the daughter is not part of the reading.
Right, it's not. You're absolutely right. We cut it off, just that she walks in. She's the one who walks through the how do you call it, through the Gudori. That's it. It's not. No, sorry, not even. I'll tell you right now. Exactly. It's not. Yeah, it's not even mentioned. He just beats them a big. He defeats them, and that's it. They don't even mention. They keep you on a cliffhanger. You don't know what happens at the end. Exactly. It's not. Sometimes the haftarot are not necessarily whole chapters. They take that which is relevant to the story and the Torah portion. In other words, what parallels do they draw? And that was relevant in terms of the context of the Haftarah and the context of the Torah reading. So that's doesn't necessarily give the whole story.
This daughter never has children because she never gets married, because she lives alone and she has no, there's no history. There's no future and there's no past almost, because she stops.
Mhm.
Everything stops about her in a moment in time. Maybe that's why she's not mentioned in terms of her mother, not her. Maybe that's why.
Could be. Maybe
No,
that's
she has no effect on anything except for that moment that happened.
yeah.
But
It's
maybe it's saying something because of his background, Jephthah's background, he doesn't value himself. And as a result, he doesn't value women, especially coming from a prostitute. So
I think
what value does he have for his daughter? Doesn't sound like he has much value for her or for women.
I don't know so much about women, because the part with the prostitute was his father. That's not what he did. But I think you may
That's his background.
right.
That's
Certainly you can tell, there's no question about it, that he was affected, psychologically, in many ways. Sorry.
Bless you.
By that which his brethren did. You might want to say, I don't know, maybe he thought one of his brothers would come out of his house. I don't know, like in terms of, to find out what's going on, or out of his gates, to see, out of he was going to be the head leader, right? And as we mentioned beforehand, possibly those who came, the elders of the city that came to greet him and to ask him to come back, were most likely, or at least some of them would have been his brothers. Maybe, I don't know, maybe he was thinking of that. I don't know. But there's definitely, Farley, you're definitely right in the sense that he for sure, if this would be today and he would have gone for a psychological evaluation, there would be a lot of issues and underlying past experiences that would affect his psyche. There's no question about it. So I'm not a therapist to give you the exact what exactly he would be, or under what category, but there's no question about it that he would be scarred, and he would definitely need help.
We're putting all the blame on him. What about his own father? The father that had the baby with the mistress and whose wife and children discarded him as a nothing until they needed him. I think the father bears some kind of weight here.
So it's unclear whether it's an extramarital, or maybe it was before he was married. It's unclear. It doesn't say that he just says later on he had with his wife children, and when they grew up, they could have been way before he was married. Possibly another marriage that he had, as I mentioned beforehand. Maybe he was married to her legally, but her profession beforehand was a prostitute.
See, that's where my commentary differs. So it said that she was actually faithful to him. It doesn't say she was a harlot. It says she was a concubine.
Okay. So but this is where I'm saying, so what we're saying could be two different, one and the same. Once he had relations with her, she was no longer how do you call it, a prostitute. You understand? So and that is what Michael was saying with Yehoshua. Yehoshua ended up marrying who? Yehoshua married that harlot that was in Jericho.
Of course, could there also be a distinction made because the harlot in Jericho helped him? It helped Israel get into.
I don't think so. It's just that she repented, and we don't. And this is, I think, indicative of what tshuva is. If you repent fully, then you're no longer, you cleansed. That's it. What you're no longer referred to as a prostitute. You're a new person, so to speak. That's a different. Whatever you did, not any different than if like if you went out to if you were being sued by somebody, right? You were being sued you're exonerated, you didn't do it. You can't say, well, this is the guy who stole. It's no longer. You can't say that even by law. You can be sued because you were found not to be. That's done. While those under question, you can say this is the one who is, indicted for such and such and such, until you're either found guilty or innocent. Once you're found innocent, you're not that criminal who did it. You didn't perform it. The law has already ruled in your favor that you didn't found you as not. And this is the same thing. It's a new person. That it's an old subject. So once Yoshua's wife turned away from that, she was his wife. She wasn't like a harlot. But it could be that the text were referring. The reason why the text says it, because that's what the kids were using as an excuse for it. Oh, you're yours. That's what they were egging him on, and that he was not accepted because of his past or his mother's past, which they kept on bringing up as an issue. So it's a little bit of it's not that clear. Again, a lot of it is debatable in terms of what the whole story. And you'll see there's a lot of reading in between the lines when you read Nevi'im. It's not always clear. Some of the stuff it is important to understand because of trajectories of the story and legal rights, but by and large, it's just fun in terms of trying to figure out, like what was the real outlying, conditions. But sometimes they're also unimportant or won't change how the story unfolds. The idea is that I think every generation will look at the same story, and will also view it with their glasses on. In other words, what is normal in that generation. By and large, I don't think any of the generations right now, would condone, killing daughter, etc., for whatever you say. But how do we deal with that? And how do you see that? How can you rectify that? That will be affected by how and what the morals of the day and the mores of the day are. Maybe there were generations that absolutely she was very happy to be how do you call it? To be to be a martyr or whatever it might be, but not in our day and age. That will not that we cannot fathom with what we know today, what we know and what we accept as being normal or being the minimum expectations of relationships that we have with one another. If I can.
Is there anywhere else where 4 days appears as being a significant number?
I was trying to figure out why 4 days a year. It's a very, very, very interesting thing. And not only that, she asks for 2 months. I don't know what the connection of the 2 months and the 4 days. It almost seems like it's kind of like a super holiday, like beyond, you know what I mean? Almost like it's not just 1 day, it's 4 days, which is more than, I don't know. It's an interesting thing. I'm not sure why Ba'at Yamin Bashama for 4 days of the year. I'm not sure. Maybe for the 4 seasons. I don't know. Like just to kind of like it covers kind of like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I know that there's 4. If you want to say there's 4 Rosh Hashanot in a year.
That's true.
So that's maybe the only other 4 that I know in terms of the importance. There's 4.
That was the only thing I could think of too, that it was part of the festival. But it's really only the maidens who went.
Yeah.
So she did not become a martyr.
No, but again, it also depends on how you interpret verse 40, whether it was after her death that they created kind of a holiday, or that they, during her, the way that they treated with this whole vow was that she had to live a life of solitude. And then 4 days a year, she was allowed, so to speak, visitors.
No.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, no, that's one of the that 4 days of the year they came in and they lamented with her.
No, but this is afterwards.
No, No,
The-
this
The
is what
maidens, for the maidens of the land, it says after 2 months' time, she would return to her father. And he did to her as he had vowed, which
Right.
means he killed her.
so
But
again.
But we just, we
So
don't,
He
So I
didn't
gave-
kill her.
didn't kill.
She wasn't killed.
She was burnt.
No,
That was
Well-
his vow.
Right. So
but
there
this was
are.
the,
So there were, as I mentioned, the commentaries have a difference of opinions. Some say yes, that absolutely that's what happened. He killed her as was in a vow, and that's the easy way of reading it in the most simplistic way, that he killed her, and then there were 4 days of memory that were made for her. There's
No.
another explanation.
That's not what it says. They're trying to get out of it because it's so horrifying.
Right.
They're trying
So
to put it in a less grisly fashion, but
Could
that's
be.
not what the text says.
but that's,
Right.
but the whole concept, of course, at least in Talmudic interpretation, is that we have to not necessarily take the text literally word for word, or even Rashi or Rambam.
So let me explain to you the comment. I maybe didn't explain it right. Let me go back again. After 2 months, she returns back to her father. And he does to her et nidura shenadar, that which he did. Vehi lo yadaish, she did not know a man. Vathi chok l'Israel, it became the what's custom, or what custom are they talking about?
Not to
I
kill.
think the custom should really begin with the next line.
Okay, so
So it became a custom in Israel for the maidens of Israel to go every year for 4 days in a year and chant dirges for the daughter of Jephthah the Gilead.
okay, so that's
The
one way.
type of mourning.
interpretation.
Type
Right.
of-
So the other way of interpreting it is if you look at it in terms of where that stays, and that Vathi chok l'Israel is in the previous verse in 39. What became the law? Vehi lo yadaish, no one was allowed to marry her. That was a rule. In other words, she was off limits to anybody. That was her solitude in the sense of nobody was allowed to approach her. Nobody. She lived a solitary life. Read it again, and you'll see it. Asher lo vehi lo. Why suddenly vehi lo yadaish vathi chok l'Israel? We already said it beforehand, by the way. Here in 38, vatef al bet betuleha le'arim. She cried over her virginity, that she never had the opportunity to marry. She returns after. In other words, she still never knew a man. She never had relations. She was never, and that became a rule. In other words, she was off limits to anybody, which means she lived a solitary life. And who was allowed to visit her? Only maidens. 4 times a year. That is it. Again, this is where you can look at it. Miriam, there's no negative. There's no either or. That's why the as I mentioned before, and the beauty of this is it gives us the opportunity to interpret it in what we believe is. Regardless, I think it's the lessons that we learn, the greater lessons, as I mentioned beforehand, and the universal. And that is that every generation that reads this, something will hit home. That is the whole point of these stories. Sometimes that they're even, whether they're nice or gruesome or you right now can't, have dinner, for some time until, you can put this aside and not think about it, is a different thing, but it's the lessons that we learn. And one of those, as I mentioned, is watching your mouth.
Well, that's a lesson that I think is a good lesson.
Yeah. As we say, your mouth, God, everything that has protection, like any how do you call it? Any one of our organs that needs protection usually has one mode of protection. So our eyes have a lid, right? Our mouth is the only thing that has 2. It has lips and teeth. So you can protect your inside by your teeth closes your hole, and then you can also close your lips. So you have to watch your mouth, because your eyes, you can do damage by seeing things, but there's nothing more damaging than when you yap things that are even if they're true, as I mentioned. So forget about lies that are for sure, but that's a different, you're not allowed to lie. But your mouth needs double protection. Before we say anything, we have to think twice. That's what we need two filters even. Not one is not enough. We need two filters before we utter something, because that could be super deadly, literally and figuratively. So I think that's the beauty of interpretation that we have, and as long as that we take it and we learn our lessons from it, or at least a lesson from it. Okay. Any questions? Any other questions? Beautiful. So God willing, I'll see everyone next week. Let me hold on one second. Come on.
We'll be in May.
Yes.